Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. If you are a new listener, I want to thank you for listening. On the show, we aim to inform, educate, inspire, and increase understanding of kids who think, learn, or experience the world differently. I can't tell you how much of a privilege it is to work with other professionals who also work with children and adolescents, because we get to be part of the transformation that's possible when children are seen and heard and they get the support that they need. Today, I invited one of our Child Nexus professional members, Kalisha Beard. She's a licensed clinical social worker and mental health therapist, and she's coming on the podcast today to discuss how to address a child's lack of passion for learning. I can't wait for you to listen in.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Kalisha Beard, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Thank you for having me, Karen.
I'm so glad that you're here. We've met, it seems like so long ago. It was definitely pre-COVID.
Yes.
And, we've been in touch and communicating during this atypical year. And I'm so glad that you are here and we get to have this conversation.
Yes, I'm happy to be here, Karen. You are right. This has been an atypical year, to say the least.
It really has. I mean, we're recording this in the midst of a pandemic. I feel like we're at the tail end now, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like I can see the light. The light is getting brighter at the end of this tunnel. Yeah. Things are starting to open up, and, we'll touch on that today. And you know that my clinical work is largely assessment, evaluation, consultation, but you are doing the deep work with children and families. You are in there working with them, which is why I wanted to have you on the podcast. We have seen such an increase in the mental health challenges for many during this year. And for many, it's been a traumatic experience and has resulted in significant life changes. How are the children and adolescents that you have seen been impacted during this year? Can you talk about that?
Yes. The children that I see have been impacted significantly. I think that a lot of us underestimated the intensity that this pandemic was going to have on us all. I mean, going into it, we thought it might be 2-3 months. It actually ended up being over a year. So to ask children to go from one learning environment into the home was asking a lot. And so that led to a lot of symptoms consistent with clinical depression, consistent with anxiety. A lot of students and a lot of my clients' attention difficulties started manifesting in ways that their parents were able to see and discern, because they were actually now observing them do their virtual learning in the home. And so it led to an increase in referrals for me. And what I saw was intelligent children, very, very intelligent, bright children who harbored great disdain for the traditional learning format prior to COVID. And so they actually were worse off during COVID because of all that COVID demanded from them.
Right. And that's really important because, we've been talking on this podcast about alternative learning environments. And when you talk about students having a disdain for the learning environment that they were in pre-COVID, can you say a little bit more about that? Because I feel that that's an emerging conversation that we are all having about what education should look like, particularly to support, diverse learners.
Yes. And that's why I love your podcast. I especially love to talk with Dr. Maureen, who's doing awesome work in Washington with micro schools. And one of the things that my clients are bringing up is, maybe they have interest in music, or maybe they have interest in wanting to be, let's say, a comic artist. A lot of artistic children out there are wondering, why am I having to go to school and learn about geometry? Why am I going to have to go to school and learn about science and chemistry and physics and all these things that just do not interest them? And then so to force them into a learning format that they don't feel gels with the core of their person can be very traumatic, and it can lead to these symptoms of depression and anxiety that I mentioned, because it's just there's not a goodness of fit there. And so I think we're learning more about alternative learning environments. I think that more people are starting to think of what type of setting should we be able to recommend for these children so that their mental health is addressed and that it's valued.
Okay. And I think that that's really important. I think a lot of parents feel like they don't have a choice with respect to schools because, the idea is that your kids go to the local school or the school in their geographic location. I know that was the case for me, but now it seems that there's more choice. There are more things to consider, but parents have to first know that there are options and that there are alternative options. But then also those options have to be affordable and they have to be accessible to students and to families, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm hoping that as time progresses here, those options are made available. But like you said, parents have to be aware of them. And so I think that what you're doing with this podcast is increasing their awareness. What I'm doing in my clinical work is listening to your podcast and then presenting it to parents to put that on their radars. You don't just have to go with what's in the school district. And then for families that may be low income, if they do have that awareness, they're starting to realize that they can, apply for fee waivers or grants of some sort to really give their child the access that they need to those learning settings.
Yes, I've seen that too with a lot of parents, again, seeking those resources and it just opens up, the options for them and then they can have that conversation with their children about, kind of what is the environment that would support you in terms of what you want to do, what you're interested in. And that just helps with learning and maximizes learning.
Mm-hmm.
And, the focus over the last year has been on I feel like we've been in survival mode, right? But for many students, like you're describing, who made this transition to remote learning, a lot of parents are saying that their children have lost their love or their passion for learning over this past year. And I think part of what many students love about learning was being in a classroom and being with their peers and being with their teachers and spending time during breaks and recess, connecting with others and learning in this social context.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on re-engaging students in the learning process? I know that's a big part of the work that you do, but how are you helping students with this issue?
I think one of the things that we have to really realize is that validation for their thoughts and for their feelings goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
I have to be honest with you, Karen. If I was in high school during COVID and this happened, and I was thrusted into the home environment, with one of my parents, I think that it would have been very difficult. So I think we have to really be empathetic and go back to our high school years and to our elementary school years and put ourselves in that position and say, if this were me, how would that have impacted me? Because, parents can have very high expectations like, okay, you're not going in person, but this is the same thing. It's pretty much like you're an online student in college. So you're in high school. This is really going to prepare you for college. So get in there, do that work, look at your screen for 6 hours. I did it because I had online courses. And it's like, boom,
right.
boom, boom. But where's the validation? Where's the empathy? I think we have to validate and we have to respect our children and our students and our clients' emotions. COVID-19 has asked a lot from these students. And then in answer to your question, how do we address their lack of passion for learning? I think that we first really have to assess what's going on. And so a lot of times the lack of passion can be present because maybe they're experiencing difficulties. And we have to try to figure out how to identify the factors that are leading to those difficulties. So is it potential learning disabilities? Is it attention difficulties? Are there social emotional challenges that are impacting their ability ability to perform. And what really helps us to figure out and tease apart what it is to recommend that they either get a neurological evaluation or some sort of biopsychosocial experience that's looking at, are we working with a disability? Let's look at their personality. Let's look at their processing speed, their ability to comprehend, their reading level. Let's go through their experience and their mental health history. Have they experienced trauma? What have they looked like in terms of like their stages of development? How did they move through each of the stages? We're really trying to figure out what's happening. And there's so much stigma that's associated with children getting neurological evaluations or going to see a therapist like myself and getting those biopsychosocial assessments. So we really have to reduce stigma. And these evaluations, these assessments are really going to bring to light what is the child's strength, what is the child's weakness, and we're going to use our findings to inform how we proceed. And I think one of the other things we need to do is to bring to our students' attention that there are different kinds of intelligences. And so if they're not passionate about learning in the traditional setting, it could be because they have other intelligences that are just not brought to light as much in that environment. So, then we would be looking at making recommendations for those alternative learning environments for different settings, validating how they're feeling, and then just encouraging them to do their absolute best. So if there is not an ability to transfer them to an alternative school, how do we just let them know that just give this your all, give it your absolute best, and that's all we can ask as your parent. And then also engaging them in activities that's going to allow them to learn what they do best outside of school. So I think that's another large part of it. And then also, I think work has to be done in terms of the parents communicating with teachers to really find out how they're teaching and, maybe to make recommendations as it relates to how your child learns. I think that parents definitely have to advocate for their children. And it is up to the teachers to make it fun. And sadly, teachers have been going through a difficult time during this pandemic. So they may not be making the learning fun. But if parents could speak to them and just remind them of the key role that they play in their child's life and in bringing learning to life, I think that would be beneficial for the child.
I agree. And I think, one of the things you touched on was that parent-teacher relationship that is so important. Because as a parent, if you're seeing your child, lose that passion for learning, you see your child struggling in some academic area, communicating that information to the teacher is so important, because then maybe the teacher can initiate a school-based assessment to determine, like you were saying, if there's a learning issue, or make the recommendation for a more comprehensive assessment to determine if there are intention issues. And then you can also see, the parents and the teachers can also have a conversation about whether or not what they're seeing at home is similar to what the teacher is seeing at school. So you're looking to see if, are these behaviors and these concerns being manifesting in different environments, because that tells you about the pervasiveness of the struggle.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about really the importance of doing an evaluation. Of course, that's what I do. And through doing those, I see the relief that many parents have once they understand why their child is struggling. And that probably makes your job easier because you know what to work on. Because if we know that this is not ADHD, this is anxiety, then you can dig deep and work with that child on the anxiety that's getting in the way.
Yes. And the symptoms do mimic. The symptoms do mimic each other. So you have that, difficulty concentrating. So are we going to throw the ADHD label here, or are we going to assess further and say, maybe the child is so anxious, and it could be about their classroom performance. It could be about how other students are going to perceive them. It could be maybe because they're in a Zoom or I think people are using Google Chat to do their schooling. And maybe there's people in the classroom that have bullied them in the past. And so they're very, very anxious about actually speaking. A lot of them don't want to turn their cameras on. And so if they have had negative adverse experiences prior to this pandemic, and then that makes them very anxious, we could see that difficulty with focus. I myself find it difficult to focus at times if I'm anxious. So it's really about figuring out, like you said, what is the diagnosis here, and really doing our best. That's what we have to do as clinicians, is doing our best to assess and to assess well, because we don't want to misdiagnose.
Right. And we assess not to put a label on kids or adolescents, but to assess to increase understanding so that we can help, right, in a targeted way. So we're not trying to address the attention when it's really anxiety. We're not trying to address difficulties with school when it's really a self-concept or a self-esteem issue, because that's when we can really help and we can make a difference, when we're working on the things that matter.
Yeah.
And that really comes back to the stigma, because, you mentioned stigma. And I think sometimes the delay in even asking the school for a school-based assessment or pursuing a private assessment, it's the stigma, because you're afraid of what that might uncover. And, I've had parents say to me, even before we start the assessment process, I want you to do the evaluation, but I don't want a label on my child. Right. And part of that is connected to that stigma. And what does that label mean? But again, it's really not about the label. It's about understanding.
Yes. I love that, Karen. I couldn't have said it better myself. About understanding and furthering our understanding.
Right. So, like I said, things are starting to open up, which is great. And, I remember in December, that was, we're now recording this in April. So just a few months ago, there was a spate of student suicides in and around Las Vegas, I think it was. And it pushed the school districts to bring students back for in-person learning more quickly, which speaks to, again, the mental health issues associated with being in this remote learning environment for an extended period of time, which is a contributing factor. Of course, we can't blame it completely on that. But now most of schools are opening, have a plan for opening, either for hybrid or full in-person. And for parents listening, how can we prepare our children and adolescents to return to in-person learning, particularly given all the things that, you've just said about the anxiety and, some of the bullying that may have occurred before COVID, and, they've been on Zoom, but they may have had their cameras off for this entire year. And now they're facing their peers face to face again, and all of those things are going to come up. What are your thoughts on that, on how to support this transition period?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things that we have to remember is that, with every new change, there will be this adjustment period. And so we have to, let the parents know this. And then we also have to let children know this. And then to just normalize that, like you have been at home for the past year, looking at a camera. Your camera was off sometimes because teachers didn't require it be on. Maybe you didn't have to get dressed because maybe that wasn't expected. So, now having to, I think most of the schools that I've heard of are doing the hybrid that you mentioned. So now having to go back to school on campus for 3 days out of the week, there might be just an adjustment difficulty. And if there is, that's okay. As your parent, I'm going to support you and we're going to work through this. So, and then also parents have to check in. So when they're picking their children up from school, or when they get back home from work, let's say, and they see their child, checking in. So at dinner time, if they're having dinner as a family, which I extremely recommend having at least a few times out of the week, if they're at that dinner table, let's say, checking in. How has it been going? What's this adjustment look like for you? And then also, I think, speaking back to about validation, I think the parents have to also say, if I were you, I think I would be having a little trouble too.
Right.
also parents thinking about their own experience. So if they have been working from home for the past year, it may be difficult for them to go back to work. Some people are really enjoying working from home. So to ask them to go back to the workplace environment can be an adjustment. And so the parent, I think, should self-disclose and humanize themselves. Like, it's been a little tough for me to have to go back from the house to work. And I know that if it's tough for an adult, it must be even tougher for you. So tell me about it. Let's talk.
That is so good. The validation and the empathy that you described before are so important during this period. Because, we've talked about some kids who've really struggled during remote learning, but for some kids, they did better. Maybe there was a lot of social anxiety that they didn't have to navigate that whole process of social interactions. And for them, it was a relief to be in this remote learning environment. And now they're going back and probably have this heightened sense of anxiety about returning back to school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm really glad that you pointed that out, Karen, because it is true that not every child has struggled during this time. So the reverse might be happening, like you said. Once school resumes, we may be getting additional referrals for the students with social anxiety and maybe performance anxiety because they're going back to a setting that they weren't really comfortable with before COVID.
Absolutely. And I feel like this year, there's so much that has happened. And so it feels like students are returning with all of that baggage, on their shoulders. We're recording in the United States, and there's been a lot of things going on over the past year. Of course, the world has dealt with COVID, and there's been that issue impacting everyone. But here we've also dealt with a lot of political unrest, and there's been a social justice reckoning. And, all of these have contributed to stress. When we started talking about the mental health of our students and the kids that we see, all of these things have contributed to stress. And some of those students are still going back to school with a lot of that stress still on their shoulders, even though things are opening up and things are looking better. And some things have changed politically, they still are carrying a lot of that stress, particularly, as, for us, as adults and parents, we're watching, here in this country, the George Floyd, the trial of the person who murdered George Floyd. And that's bringing up a lot of trauma for parents. And there are a lot of students who are watching this manifest and being re-traumatized. And so not only are you going back to the school environment and finding, a way of relearning maybe what you have not learned effectively remotely, but you're getting used to, this in-person learning environment again. You're being re-socialized to peers that maybe you haven't seen for a year. But then for a lot of our students and a lot of the kids we work with, they're also bringing this additional trauma, maybe with a little T or maybe with a big T, of the social justice reckoning and all the things that have happened over the past year and are still happening. And, we have to pay attention, again, like you said, to the mental health of these students as they're coming back. And it's not just about, trying to fix and address the learning loss. We have to be mindful of all that has happened in the past year and how it's uniquely impacting students, particularly students of color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it really is about paying attention to the whole child. So not just their academic performance, but the child as a whole. And I think you're absolutely right, Karen. A lot of my clients are a lot more politically savvy and abreast of what's going on than most people who don't work with kids would think. And so they are definitely carrying anxiety about the unrest, about particularly students and clients of color who have seen these videos. And then, of course, a lot of our clients are on social media. So they're seeing the videos throughout their timeline and sometimes seeing it over and over and over. And what does that do to a person's psyche? So then to go back into the learning environment and hopefully, what's happened over the past year will be brought up and addressed and validated. But sometimes it's not. It's just like, hey, you're here, pick up we're gonna keep this going, and let's just act like this didn't just occur over the past year. Like,
Right. And that's hard. Like you said, if particularly the older students who are seeing it in their feed, sitting in class and saying, "Hey, now isn't this exciting that we get to work on math in person when mentally you're thinking about all of these other things?" It's hard. And I think, again, that speaks to the validating the fears and the thoughts. It must be hard for you to sit in this classroom and learn, not only because you've been out of school for a year, but because there's a lot going on in the world that's bringing up a lot of emotions. And what is that like for you? And I agree with you that dinner time is so critical to be checking in. And then also communicating to teachers about what your child is experiencing, what your child might be feeling that can impact their ability to engage in the learning process when they return to school.
Mm-hmm. Validation is a teacher's, it is a neuropsychologist, it is a social worker or a therapist's greatest tool. Because if we can help people to realize that they are seen and that their struggle and their difficulty is witnessed and given importance, I think it really impacts mental health significantly.
Absolutely. And I know you have some great suggestions regarding coping skills, and you spoke to some of them about, I think you mentioned, for students, for example, who may be not engaged and have another interest outside of school, to really recognize those gifts for them. Can you talk a little bit about some coping skills for students who may have anxiety related to going back to school, concerns about being behind academically, but also about, again, this anxiety and the stress regarding all of the things that have been happening in the world over the past year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that one of the things to focus on is trying to be present as much as possible. I think a lot of the students that are returning to school, really on that Sunday night, they are feeling extreme anxiety. And one of the things that I recommend is be present. So, of course, maybe they want to lay out their clothes or pack their backpack or their laptop, whatever supplies they have to take. That's fine. But after you notice your mind is drifting to, okay, so I'm going to go tomorrow, and then I'm going to see, and then all of these hypotheticals have you like hours down the line into the next week, and it's only Sunday. You're already at
Yes.
5 of that totally. Be present. And as therapists, we're helping our clients and their parents be mindful. And really what anxiety does is it takes us into the future. It transports us there. And so to cope with it, we have to remind ourselves that we are not in the future right now. Sometimes we do need to plan for the future. But then we also have to balance that with staying in the present moment. So it's Sunday. My bags are packed. I know what I'm going to wear. I'm going to enjoy watching TV or spending time with my family. I'm not going to be thinking about all of these hypotheticals. And if my mind starts to veer there, I'm going to stop it and remind myself, stay in the present, stay focused. A lot of people get better and better with that by making use of meditation or other mindfulness techniques. So I think that would be definitely something that I would encourage our clients and our parents to think about as they're about to return. The other coping skill I think is that I think that people need to remember is that, in terms of helping the child to recognize what they're gifted at, the parent really does have to expose them to different settings and experiences and kind of see what they gravitate towards. Some kids know it automatically, like it's not science, it's this. Other kids, I think, need to be supported with finding out what is their thing and what is their why. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that leads to a sense of depression is I don't know my why. What is my purpose for being here? So I think parents definitely have to be diligent about exposing kids to these settings so that they can start to figure out what am I gravitating towards. And then another coping skill would be, planning for happiness. I think that we definitely underestimate that coping skill because everybody is trying to be happy, but happiness is actually something that a lot of times has to be scheduled in terms of the details of it all. So if we want to go on a vacation as a family, we know that, maybe it's summertime and the child was doing hybrid learning for these last 2 months going up to the summer vacation. Let's plan a vacation. And that's always what works. Like, we don't just book flights to Miami and show up there and say, like, I hope we have fun. Like, no, we have a hotel, we have an Uber or car service, or we have activities lined up. We're going to go to Orlando, and we're going to go to Disney World or whatever's open now, because I'm still not totally sure. But we have itinerary and what we're going to do. And I think in the same fashion, parents have to plan. And so it's not a trip abroad. Maybe it's every Saturday as a family, we do this. And, actually planning to help the child after they go and resume schooling, supplementing with these fun activities outside of school to really help them as a whole child. Because I think one of the things that contributes to significant frustration for kids who are not satisfied with the traditional learning format is just not having other options. So we all have to do things that we don't feel extremely passionate about at times. But I think what gets us through those difficult moments is having other things outside of whatever it is to supplement and to give us joy and fulfillment. So I think that's really key when we think about the child and just their overall well-being.
Absolutely. And, as I'm listening to you talk about, planning for happiness in the context of, supporting our children and adolescents, but that helps us. That helps families. It helps parents. And when we're paying attention to how we feel and what we're interested in, we're modeling a lot of that behavior for our children, which is so important because learning is not about just teaching kids about things and about facts. It's about helping them to develop life skills. And a lot of times those life skills are developed by what we show them and what we model for them. And, you talked about being mindful and being present. And again, that Sunday is such a great time for that, to kind of sit down as your kids have their clothes lined up out and sitting on the edge of their bed and saying, okay, what are you looking forward to this week? And, after you've got all that out in terms of any concerns that they might have about the following week, then you say, okay, we've talked about that. Let's be present. Let's enjoy this moment. Let's plan for happiness today. And maybe that would be, watching a movie together or watching a TV show together. And so I love the idea of planning for happiness, that it can be this vacation and it can be something, on a larger scale, but it can also be those moments when you have with your child to connect. That can be a happiness moment and a happiness time that you can plan for at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I really like what you mentioned about talking about the concerns. And then it's really suggests that we have to set a time limit for our worrying.
Mm-hmm.
Because we want to address it. So we're not just sweeping it under the rug. We're giving it the attention that it needs. But then we're saying, okay, it's time for the worrying to stop. Now we're going to shift gears and we're going to focus on the present. So whatever the problem is. And I think, to your point, we can apply the same logic and these same coping skills to our problems as adults.
Absolutely.
Think about whatever the problem is and worry about it for hours and hours and hours. I'm going to dedicate this amount of time to problem solving. And then after that time is up, now I'm shifting gears. We can't have our kids sitting in the room ruminating for hours and hours about something that may happen. In fact, a lot of times our anxieties do not come true. They don't manifest. So we're really, as therapists, asking our clients, what is the best case scenario? What is the worst case scenario? What's the best outcome? What's the worst outcome? And now, more importantly, what is likely to happen?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel like we've come full circle when we use that anxiety as an example, that, if a child has worries, if we have worries, We validate those worries. Like you talked a lot about validation. We problem solve. Okay, what can we do to kind of reduce the worry that we're having? And then we are present in the moment and we plan for happiness. That is such a great model in terms of how to cope with stressors, with anxiety, and to promote wellness, mental health for ourselves and for our children.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think, if I think a little bit about how we can support our parents further, I would have to say that 3 of the biggest strengths that a parent can have is the ability to observe, the ability to be curious, and the ability to be humble. And so if we observe what's happening in our children and then we become aware of it. Once there's awareness, then the parent can then become curious. So let's say we see a child who's withdrawing, they're isolated in their room, their grades are dropping, they're moody. So now the parent should then get into some research, like as a parent, how can I be curious about this? How do I help my child? What do I do? And then if that doesn't work, it's humility that leads the parents to us to ask for help. So observation, curiosity, and humility. I think if a parent has that, they're going to be able to support their children just fine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I'm thinking about where we are right now, and you've just given us some great tools and gems for parents to kind of navigate this transition period. And how are you feeling about things moving forward? Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic?
I would say I'm definitely optimistic.
I am too. And I'm hoping that the parents are feeling optimistic. And I have to, we have to recognize that a lot of things have changed for a lot of parents. A lot of parents have lost jobs during this time. And, there's been a lot of upheaval in the lives of many families. And again, I love that idea of observation, curiosity, and humility, because I think the parents can also apply that to themselves in terms of reaching out to help if they need it, and resources that are available, and mental health resources and financial resources if that is something that they need. And so I think a lot of the things that you've talked about today, of course, we both work with children and adolescents, and that's going to be absolutely relevant to supporting their mental health. But it also, at the same time, supports many of the parents and adults in general as we prepare for, again, this transition, but also just overall well-being. And you talk about the whole child. It's, the same is true for the whole adult. In terms of we're addressing all of our needs and having optimal health, and mental health is included in that.
Yes. And I'm happy we're having this conversation, Karen, because it means that we have gotten through and weathered this pandemic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It'll be interesting because, these podcast episodes live on for forever, I think. And to listen back a year from now in terms of where we were and to see what has changed in that time, it'll be really interesting to have a look back. And maybe, there'll be more school options, there'll be more mindfulness, there'll be more, self-care and self-awareness, and people being more present. And that would be a beautiful thing.
Yes.
Thank you so much for helping us better understand the challenges that families are facing and giving us some really great tools for helping children and helping parents and adults. So tell our listeners, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
So Karen, our listeners can reach me by contacting me via phone, and they can call me at 562-257-6199.
Thank you so much. And I'll put all that information in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for being here today, for being present with me, and for sharing such great information with our listeners. Thank you so much.
Karen, you are welcome, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation today with Kalisha Beard. We have a number of events coming up to support parents and the professionals who work with their kids. These events are all virtual for now, so you can access them from wherever you are in the world. If you want to get an invite, be sure to get on our email list at childnexus.com. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.